Hello everyone on the webinar. This is Chris Winslow, Interim Director of Ohio Sea Grant and OSU's Stone Laboratory. First want to welcome you to the participation in Lake Erie Harmful Algal Bloom 2015 forecast. What you'll see on the screens in front of you are the list of individuals that will either be speaking today or some of the guest scientists that are in the room that will be able to answer any questions that we might get via the webinar. Because of the volume of individuals that are going to be on this webinar, we're not actually video recording it, so you won't see the image of the speaker, but you will see and have access to the slides that they're going through. We have made the laser pointer option available so that the speaker can point to places on the slide. I also want you to know, if you look in the chat section of the webinar, you'll see that we have posted our Twitter handle, so @OhioSeaGrant, and the hashtag that we're using for this webinar. You will see basically 7 different speakers. We're trying to keep with those 7 speakers to just around an hour as far as the different topics we'll discuss. And then after that hour, we're going to open up for Q&A from online. At this point, I'd like to turn over the introduction of the speakers to the previous director of Ohio Sea Grant and OSU Stone Laboratory, Dr. Jeff Reuter.
Thanks very much, Chris. It's always a pleasure to get back up here, and we've really got, I think, a good presentation that will provide a lot of information for people today. Our first speaker today is going to be Dr. Laura Johnson from Heidelberg University, and Laura is going to tell us about the volume of phosphorus, the load that has gone in, both the total phosphorus and the soluble reactive, that is a critical component to our ability to present a forecast. Then we'll call on Dr. Rick Stump from NOAA. Rick is the lead oceanographer and the Harmful Algal Bloom coordinator for NOAA from Silver Spring, Maryland, and Rick will be presenting this year's 2015 forecast. When Rick completes that, Tinka Hyde, the head of water programs for U.S. EPA's U.S. EPA's Region 5 in Chicago. Basically, the Midwest here will be telling us about the results of Annex 4 of the Water Quality Agreement. Tinka was the U.S. co-chair of the Annex 4 subcommittee, and that group focused on nutrients and the targets to address the harmful algal bloom problem that we see. I will follow Tinka's presentation as the U.S. co-chair of the task team that came up with target loads, and I will talk briefly about the science behind those loads. When I'm completed, I'm going to ask Rick or if Chris Winslow will come up, and Chris will speak about 18 new projects underway from the Ohio Department of Higher Education, and that'll be followed by Jay Martin, a professor at Ohio State and the lead of our field to faucet component. And Jay will talk about 5 new projects underway, all 23 of these projects focused on this harmful algal bloom problem. Jay will be followed by Gail Hess, the executive director of the Lake Erie Commission, and Gail's going to focus on the accomplishments that have occurred since the release of the Ohio Phosphorus Task Force report in 2013. And at the very end, we're going to call up Joe DePinto from Limnotech, and Joe is going to show the impact of the large loads or the large rain events that have occurred this past June and compare what we've seen in 2015 with 2014, 13, 12, and possibly 11. So let's start with Dr. Laura Johnson to tell us about the nutrient load from the Maumee this past spring. Dr. Johnson.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks everyone for being online, and those of you who are in the room. All right, so I'll tell you about the data we've been collecting from the Maumee River. trying to learn how to click forward the slide. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. But before I show you any of the actual loading, I wanted to briefly do an overview of Heidelberg's Tributary loading program. Along with the Maumee River, we're collecting samples from 17 other stations, many of which are in Ohio and the River Raisin up in Michigan. At each of these little red dots on the map, we're collecting water samples 3 times a day. We analyze all 3 samples if the flow is up or if the water is turbid. Each of these stations is paired with the USGS gauge. So we pair our high quality water data with the USGS's very highly accurate discharge data. For the Maumee River, we collect samples in Waterville, and we've been collecting samples there since 1975. This is the largest watershed to Lake Erie. Most of the watershed is agricultural, and this is actually the biggest input into any of the Great Lakes in terms of external nutrient loading. So what have we been finding from the Maumee River over our period of record since we've been collecting data for so very long? Well, this is showing total phosphorus loads and then concentration. The total phosphorus, remember, is the phosphorus that includes that's attached to sediments as well as that which is just dissolved in the water. So I have it denoted here and throughout the talk as a muddy flask of water. The total phosphorus load over time decreased a little bit and had a little jump up here in the 2000s. Since then, we've had a slight decrease because of these high points here in 2008 and I think 2007. For a flow-weighted mean concentration, we have a similar story. We have this decrease early on, and since then we've been fairly stable in terms of total phosphorus concentration. And you can see 2014 isn't all that different than the previous years. For dissolved reactive phosphorus load, this is where we've seen all of the big changes, that classic U-shaped curve where we've had high dissolved phosphorus loads, decreases through the mid-90s, and since then we've had increases up until the most recent years. And that's also shown very clearly in our flow-weighted mean concentrations that show that pattern more strongly, and you can see that we've since leveled off at a high concentration that's similar to what we had in our period of record. Note that dissolved phosphorus, of course, is the phosphorus that's left over after we filter all the sediments out of the water, and it's that very yummy, bioavailable phosphorus that algae can use very easily. If you want to have any questions on why we're seeing these patterns in both total phosphorus and dissolved phosphorus, check out LakeErieAlgae.com. This website should be live on July 20th, and it'll tell all of the reasons as to why we're seeing these patterns. So what have we been finding this spring? Well, this is showing just discharge. This is just water, not phosphorus yet, just water, from March 1st through July 5th. And you can see we had our early March thaw. This is just when we had all of those ice flows and ice jams. And then since we hit June, we've had 3 very large storms. And it seems like we might be in the middle of another fairly large storm right now. So what did the concentrations look like during that period? Well, the red dots here show total phosphorus, and the purple dots are dissolved phosphorus. And you can see that both of these forms of phosphorus increase when we had storms. So when flow increases, we see increased concentrations. When flow decreases, we see decreased concentrations. That's classic non-point sources. That's land runoff. The dissolved phosphorus, you can see, sometimes comes up a little bit later and comes down a little later, and that's because a lot of that is delivered through tile drains. The other thing I want to point out is the last sample that we collected that's a part of these data is from June 29th, which is about halfway through that last big storm we had right before July 1st. I did not predict beyond this storm because these patterns look a little bit different than the previous storms. You see for total phosphorus we are already peaked and come down, and what it shows us is that really, with every single storm, we have unique patterns of concentration. And this is why we need to monitor as much as possible. We need to monitor as frequently as possible. And in our case, we're doing this 3 times a day. So what did we find? So if we look at the Maumee spring discharge, this is showing the discharge from 1975 through 2015. The entire bar is March through July. So, and I circled that because In 2015, we haven't gone through July yet, so this is an incomplete bar so far. The black bar is June. So if we look overall, we're high in 2015, but we're not higher than past years. We can see higher years early in the 80s and 2011. But when we look at June, we see that June was particularly high, and it's actually the highest June in terms of discharge that we've measured over our period of water quality measurement, noting this is USGS data, of course. But then also, if we go all the way back for the whole USGS record, back to 1930, this is the largest June that we've had. I think I was saying July, I meant June. So a very big June discharge. Again, this is just water, but if we turn this into the spring loads, first total phosphorus up here on the top, you can see that 1980s we had much higher total phosphorus loads during this period of time compared to 2015. But if we look at June in particular, you can see we've had the second highest June total phosphorus load compared to 1981, which is right at our peak. Now, the reason we see this pattern is because back in 1981, we had almost twice as much flow weight as we have had in 2015, so we have a much higher June load. If we look at dissolved phosphorus, we see almost the exact same patterns that we found with discharge. That we have had a very high spring so far. June is the highest load that we've had since we've been measuring in terms of just June loading. And this is because dissolved flow weight and mean concentrations are very similar between now and how they were in the 80s. So if we calculate these into our daily loads over this period of time, you can see this is each daily load. We take the concentration times the flow, and you can see that for dissolved phosphorus here, we've got our peak in March, we have our big June storms, and then this is what we do an accumulation of. So if we accumulate these daily loads over the spring, you can see how we've increased, particularly here in June. You see it's gone up quite drastically lately. Compared to total phosphorus, we see a very similar pattern, same increase in March, a similar increase here most recently in June. What's interesting is the differences in how high the daily loads got for dissolved phosphorus. You can see they're much higher in these June storms, but for total phosphorus, the daily loads were much higher in the March storm, and that's because there was ground cover in June, and that prevented all the sediment runoff that we would get normally that we had here in March. So March, no ground cover, much higher particulate phosphorus, much higher total phosphorus load. Hit the wrong thing again. And so finally, if we put these dissolved phosphorus and total phosphorus loads in the context of previous years, this is the figure that gets passed around more regularly than not. You can see that we've had our increases here. We have had a very unique June compared to all of these other years I have shown. Dissolved phosphorus load is definitely above 2014 as of now in purple. Total phosphorus is also above that, and this is probably one that's been shown more regularly. I do want to point out that all of these data, hopefully within the next month and definitely next year, are going to be available also on the Great Lakes Observing System, where you can interact with the data a little bit more, pick whatever year you want to compare, and see it anytime you want to, instead of just through an email once a week. So I believe that is everything I have. If you have any questions that you can't answer through the webinar, feel free to go to any of these web pages or email me.
Thanks very much, Dr. Johnson. I should also add that we are incredibly fortunate to have the database that we have from Heidelberg University. It goes back for over 40 years now, and we would not be able to do any of our modeling work, any of our loading work. None of the work for Annex 4 would have been possible without the results from Heidelberg. Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Richard Stump from NOAA in Washington in Silver Spring. Rick is an oceanographer and the head of their harmful algal bloom program. We're also holding questions until the very end, and then we'll allow questions to come in. I think some questions are already trickling in, and we will save those and discuss those at the very end. With that, I'll turn this over to Dr. Stump.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Pleasure to be up here. What I'll present now is our forecast for this year, and this is based on an ensemble of models. And certainly credit, of course, Laura Johnson, as Jeff said, because the Heidelberg data models are also being produced with models provided by Joe DePinto at Lindna Tech and Don Scavia at University of Michigan, Dan Openauer at NC State, and Craig Stowe with my sister office in Great Lakes Lab. So let's go along. First question probably people have is, we had a forecast last year in 2014, and how did that forecast come out? How did we do on that? And we had forecast around a 6 in severity, where 2011 is a 10, and 0 would be absolutely no bloom at all. And the forecast range, you could see the actual event last year from a biomass and severity was pretty much within what we predicted. Now, there's certainly a question everyone has, because Toledo had a drinking water problem, and so the bloom was at a 6, obviously not a 2011. And there are certain conditions that happened. The first is that the bloom rapidly increased at the end of July, far more rapidly than normally occurs then. And also, it concentrated very intensely near Toledo. You can see down here, this is the Toledo intake is right in this area, and you can see how much the bloom increased from the 24th to the 31st, and the actual measurements were late on August 1st when they found the microsystem level, and continued intensification. This is something this specific. This kind of slug of water going right over an intake is not something we can do well in advance. We're certainly working on the modeling in order to try to do the transport in short term, but this combination was extreme intensity.
The volume's being picked up from the phone, so you can speak a little louder and towards the phone will be great.
Okay, if I stand on this side, is that helpful? All right. So, 2015, we started a spring projection this year, trying to get a sense of what's going on before we get to this event here. Close work with Laura Johnson on this. And at the end of May, we were projecting a potential for what would be a moderately low severity bloom. And the graphic here looks very familiar from Laura's work, and you could see that the discharge is certainly below 13 and 14 overall, and well below 11. But that's the key reasons why, is while we had a typical March discharge, we had relatively dry April and May. Okay. But on our projections, as we got into June, and this is the projection on about June 29th, you can see we had a big increase in the projected bloom. So the severity went down to perhaps under 4, and by the 1st of June, it's gone up rapidly. The question, why is that? Just to put this in context, this is where we were looking at the end of June, where a severity maybe perhaps just under 2014, but a fairly large potential range. One important point is the early season projection uses just one model, and we use an ensemble of the last 2 decades of climatology in order to forecast where it's going. So we looked at, when we're at the end of May, we're looking at what happened over the last 2 decades in June in order to try to predict where it would go. Well, as Laura indicated, we had a lot of water in June, and just how much, I'll recap that. 4th wettest June in Toledo this year, among the 20 wettest months since the Weather Service started data 130 years ago. Record discharge for June, 3rd highest monthly discharge since USGS started data, and then with Laura's data, it's the largest load since total phosphorus since '81 and the largest dissolved phosphorus load measured. Huge difference here on 2015 in June. And to put that in a perspective, here's a different way of view of the lake. If we look at 2015, there's a huge amount of sediment. The satellite image is showing true color, very tan-rich, tan-colored water. This is at the end of June, with all of that sediment coming in. A lot of the phosphorus comes with the sediment. If you look at even 2011, there was much less sediment in the lake, because at this point it had calmed down, but there's a big difference in the scope. This gives a sense of just how large that event was. From the model point of view then, we're using 4 models. We have 2, what we call the NOAA Q and the NOAA P. These use discharge. Q represents discharge in hydrographic terminology, and P is bioavailable phosphorus. There's the University of Michigan GLERL model, Bayesian model, which draws on the phosphorus load through Bayesian techniques. And then there's the Lean model of Limnotech, which is a full three-dimensional hydrodynamic model, deterministic model versus a statistical model. So we have a deterministic model. We have three statistical type models, and they all use different aspects and different components. So that ensemble, they're giving them the same results that really makes a difference, that their consistency. So this graphic gives, this is the answer, I guess, to the question of what's the forecast in 2015. It looks now, we're looking at potentially the second worst bloom after 2011, worse than 2013. Even with the uncertainty range, we're expecting a bloom more severe than 2014 from a biomass perspective. I should emphasize this is a biomass perspective as compared to any water, any issues from a water treatment perspective. And of course, the scale gets up on the uncertainties is a little shy of 2011, but we're looking at a bloom that is, as ensemble, definitely the second worst. What does this mean overall? Well, a key part is by having advance warning of the blooms, we can reduce risk. Water treatment plants are ready. They are prepared with, they have the chemicals they need, the activated charcoal, the carbon. They have the protocols in place. There will be no surprises from their perspective. It also gets to the potential that people can monitor conditions around, within the lake, so that anyone who's doing recreation or boating or so forth can be well prepared. And to get some context, when we talk about 2013, what does that look like, and how does that look compared to 2011? Because that's kind of the range. Well, 2011, we have true color images on the top for 11 and 13, and then the actual bloom on the bottom. And the warmest colors are the high bloom. If it's down in the cool colors, that is presence but at low risk. You can see the 2011, of course, covered from Toledo to well past Cleveland. 2013 was much constrained in the Western Basin. Overall, very intense in that area, of course. Put it in a different perspective, though, most of Lake Erie was not affected in 13 by a bloom. It was fine, and I've superimposed that bloom index on the rest of the lake, which does not have a cyanobacteria bloom. So there's a huge amount of lake that is we expect will be free of this kind of condition. A second, and I should say for recreation, 2013 had the Battle of Lake Erie commemoration. And in late September, when the bloom would peak, and everyone went out and had a great time, and those tall ships were not in scum. This is right off Gibraltar Island where we are here, and that's what the water looked like at that time. Another aspect is the conditions vary. Winds do push the bloom around. They move the currents in the lake. Lake Erie is incredibly influenced by the wind patterns. And to show clearly in 2013 and 14, this area, this is close to where, in 2013, Carroll Township had a problem with Microsystem, their drinking water. And this was in a very intense bloom area, whereas in 14, there was essentially no bloom at the peak in that region. So while Toledo had a potential problem in August 14, that's not the case. And down in Carroll or Point Clinton, that would be fine. The other part is, a Canadian perspective, it's the opposite. 2013, the winds were keeping it on the Ohio coast. In 14, by September, after it had hit Toledo in August, it was pushed over towards Canada. So in 13, there was nothing on the Canadian coast, but in 14, it showed up there. So it really does vary between years. This is not something that's covering the whole region all the time. And it does grow from west to east as well. As another component, we have a bulletin. This will be the 7th year, where we use the satellite imagery to identify where the bloom is, and we use hydrodynamic models to forecast over the next 3 to 5 days where it will be going. And example from last year, we continue that bulletin, and anyone can subscribe to the bulletin here. And of course, there are a number of websites that have direct access to the current bulletin, so you get that information. And this is actually satellite image. In this case, the forecast is not. There's only a slight bit of movement on this particular event. The bulletin also has, it's as a PDF file. Many people don't realize there's a GeoPDF, and you can actually read geospatial information by having this tool that you can actually pull latitude and longitude. So if you're wondering from a point of view of boating or you want to go out, you can actually pull the bulletin up and identify where the edge of the bloom is. Images that are present on the bulletin. So there is a way to get additional information about where it is now, where it's likely to be over the next several days as we go on. Right now, we're not at a point where we have a significant presence. There are some microsystems found in the lake, but we're not at a bloom condition at this point. So overall, on the 14, the ensemble average is an 8.7. This is greater than 2013. It is less than, of course, the 10 of 2011, but the range of uncertainty is between 8 and 9.5 overall from a severity. This is definitely more biomass than was seen last year, and it could well be the second largest bloom we've yet seen. Impacts, I emphasize, they do vary with the winds. Scums, of course, form on during calm days when you have winds that mixes and it moves around the lake based on those wind patterns. They do develop from west to east, and typically it starts in late July, and the maximum extent is usually late August into September. Most of the lake will be fine most of the time, and it's possible to get updates with our bulletin. And if people are looking for more detailed information from various sensors and water monitoring systems, there's several sites. Of course, ours is to have forecasts, but there's also the GLOS data. Laura Johnson had mentioned that, data.glos.us is portal, and Galero has their water quality sensors also available. So that captures the forecast this year. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rick. With that, well, I should also add that just as we're very lucky to have the data on the loading from Heidelberg University, it was incredibly important for us to have Rick's model and the models of the others that he described in doing the ensemble forecast today for our work with Annex 4 to come up with the targets to address the harmful algae issue for both the U.S. and Canada. And with that, I'm going to invite up Tinka Hyde, the head of water programs for U.S. EPA Region 5 in Chicago. And Tinka is the U.S. co-chair of Annex 4, the nutrient annex of the Water Quality Agreement. And Tinka will tell you now what we're going to do as a region about these harmful algal blooms and the loading that's occurring. Tinka.
Thanks, Jeff, and good afternoon to those of you on the phone and in the room. So, as the co-chair of the Annex 4 subcommittee, I just wanted to acknowledge that we had a wide variety of folks who were part of this effort, including Jeff and several of the folks that are in the room today. So at the end, there'll be a list of some of the folks who are part of this. I'm going to talk about the targets, our allocation, our plan for consultation today, and then next steps. So this slide just provides a little context. Under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, we had ecosystem objectives that we needed to meet, and this chart links the various basins in the Great Lakes in Lake Erie to the lake ecosystem objectives. So in the Central Basin, we were tasked with addressing low oxygen issues to minimize the extent of low oxygen outcomes, oxygen zones in the Central Basin. In the Eastern Basin, we were tasked with addressing maintaining a level of algae below nuisance conditions. That really focuses on Cladophora or benthic algae. In the near shore, there are localized blooms that occur at the mouths of several rivers, and so we're focusing on the cyanobacteria blooms that occur there. And in the Western Basin, similarly, focusing on the cyanobacteria blooms in order to maintain levels that don't produce toxins that pose a threat to human health or the ecosystem. And then finally, maintaining mesotrophic conditions in the open waters of the Western and Central Basins, and then oligotrophic conditions in the Eastern Basin so that the lake maintains its productivity. So these are the targets that we are proposing. It's important to note that the three basins actually work in concert, not in isolation, and so the targets that we set up really need to work together. I do want to note that we did not make a recommendation for Eastern Basin Cladophora targets at this time. We really don't have the science to support that. There is, however, research going on in Canada and several other areas, and we've got a meeting later on this fall to bring together those researchers to try to get a better sense of how we might be able to achieve load for the Central Basin. The hope is that, and the expectation is that this will produce a dissolved oxygen level in the hypolimnium of about 2 milligrams per liter or more. And we hope that that will then result in reductions in internal phosphorus loading from sediments, improvements in the benthic community, improvements or benefits to drinking water sources that pull from that portion of the lake, and then reductions in cyanobacteria blooms that occur in some of the Central Basin areas as well. So in order to achieve the 6,000 metric tons, we do need to reduce the loading by 40% from current levels in the U.S. and Canada. In the Western Basin, as I think has been mentioned before, the non-point source runoff from the Maumee during spring periods is the best predictor of cyanoblooms in the Western Basin. So reducing spring phosphorus loads from the Maumee by 40% is expected to reduce cyanoblooms in the Western Basin to mild levels. That's equivalent to 2012 in 9 years out of 10. The 2012 is representative of those a bloom that did not really produce significant toxic levels. And 9 years out of 10 is really related to the fact that weather, as we're seeing today, does have an impact on this. And so severe weather events will have an impact and will not allow us to likely achieve this every year. It's important to know that bioavailable phosphorus that Laura talked about, the yummy stuff I think she referred to, is an important area to reduce as well. So we have a numeric load in the Western Basin for the Maumee of 860 metric tons of total phosphorus and 186 metric tons of dissolved reactive phosphorus. And this is for a spring load. So next I want to focus on our nearshore. We are using the Maumee as a surrogate, and we think that what's happening in these watersheds are similar to what's happening in the Maumee, and so we are also recommending a 40% reduction in spring loads for both soluble reactive and total phosphorus. The priority watersheds were picked based on where we did observe some localized blooms, and this is a map that shows where those watersheds are. Two in Canada, one, the Thames River, which actually discharges into the Lake St. Clair, and then down the Detroit River, and then the Leamington Tribs, which is a really small watershed just south of the Thames River. And then in the U.S., it's the Raisin River, the Maumee, Toussaint Creek, Portage River, Sandusky River, and the Huron River as well. Right now, we're working on allocations. As I said earlier, the 40% reduction will be allocated proportional to what U.S. and Canada contribute. We know that the total phosphorus load to the Central Basin in 2008 was a little over 9,500 metric tons. So we're confirming where those contributions come from, and then we'll apply the 40% reduction to that contribution. We are currently in the process of having consultation or a public comment period, if you are familiar with those terms. We are asking for folks to provide us comments and input. You can find the materials at binational.net, and then there'll be an opportunity to either go to a U.S. website or a Canadian website to provide feedback and input. On that website, you can find some general information in terms of web content, an actual printable fact sheet, and the Objectives and Targets Task Team report. So that's the report that was developed by the task team that was led by Jeff and his counterpart, Sandy George from Environment Canada. The next steps are consultation will occur. In the U.S., our consultation is going to go through the end of August, and in Canada, their consultation is going to end, I think, in the end of July, but they may have some additional consultation into August. We have to then take those comments, pull them together, and make final recommendations to the Great Lakes Executive Committee in the December timeframe so that it can be finalized by February of 2016. We're going to finalize our allocations by country, and then the next thing we're really working on is the domestic action plan. So that's the implementation plans for how we're going to actually achieve the 40%. And lots of folks have mentioned the fact that there's additional actions that are already going on, and those efforts will continue to help achieve some of these reductions.
Thanks very much, Tinka. I do need to say it's really been a pleasure to work with Tinka and her counterpart, Susan Humphrey from Environment Canada. What I'm going to do right now is talk about the recommendations in the report of the Objectives and Targets Task Team. I was the U.S. co-chair of that task team. My counterpart was on the Canadian side was Sandra George, as Tinka had indicated, and really the team of Tinka and Susan and Sandy and I, it was a great group to work with and to interact with. Chris, as I move I see it here, it's perfect. As Tinka indicated, the report's now available. You can go to bidational.net to see the report of our task team. Encourage you to do that, and that's also where you could leave your comments on the report. And I want to emphasize right now that the report is calling for adaptive management, which really means that we need to be monitoring and measuring the load that is coming into the lake, seeing the way the lake responds, and really making a determination, are we satisfied with the 40% reduction that's being recommended? And as we take best management actions to achieve the 40% reduction, are we truly achieving the desired reduction? Quick summary, as Tinka indicated, we focused really on 4 areas in the lake. The Central Basin, there we're looking at the dead zone or low dissolved oxygen within the bottom waters. The Eastern Basin, we tried to look at Cladophora, but our charge was to do everything in a science-based fashion. So we're not making policy, we're making recommendations. All the recommendations have to be based on science, and we didn't feel comfortable at this point that the science was good enough to make recommendations on reducing phosphorus to combat Cladophora in the Eastern Basin. We also focused on the near shore area of the lake, and then we focused on the open waters of the Western Basin. Looking at harmful algal blooms, what I've tried to do here is just very simply summarize the recommendations in the report and what our goals were, and I'm going to try to show you if we achieved our goals of the 40% reduction, what would the lake look like? So the goal was produce harmful algal blooms that were equal or smaller than the bloom that we had in 2012, 9 years out of 10, or 90% of the time. We used the 2008 year as our base year. And the reason that we chose that year, that was a very large discharge year. The discharge out of the Maumee that year was so large that when we look at the last 22 years, it was only exceeded 10% of the time. Strategy is that if we could reduce that load, the load during that year, to a level that would produce a bloom no larger than 2012, we would be able to carry that forward and therefore produce blooms no larger than 2012, 9 years out of 10, assuming that that discharge would only be exceeded 1 year out of 10. We chose the Maumee, or used the Maumee, again, as indicated by Tinka, because it was the most reliable data, and it's a great surrogate for the other tributaries. When we look at the blooms themselves, we can see that they can accurately be forecast. This is what Rick Stump does, what Joe DePinza does. We can actually accurately forecast the severity of the blooms based on the spring load, 1 March to 31 July, from the Maumee. Our target load is 860 tons of total phosphorus and 186 tons of soluble reactive or dissolved phosphorus. And what those two targets represent, those are 40% reductions of the load that came in 2008. They equate to a flow-weighted mean concentration of 0.23 milligrams per liter for total phosphorus and 0.05 milligrams per liter for dissolved reactive phosphorus. We suggest that our task team suggests that we use those flow-weighted mean concentrations as a strategy to track our progress. And again, that's a 40% reduction for the Maumee load from 2008. We observed that we could also see harmful algal blooms at the mouths of a number of tributaries, the nearshore local blooms, and those we identified as priority tributaries in nearshore. And our goal overall was to reduce the loading from all Western Basin tributaries by 40% based on the 2008 load. And again, using the flow-weighted mean concentration as a way to track our progress. Are we achieving the results? Are the best management practices that we're implementing, are they working? When we focused on the Central Basin and hypoxia or anoxia, the dead zone, the lack of dissolved oxygen within the cold bottom layer of the large Central Basin, we found that we could reduce the size of the area of hypoxia or the duration of the time of hypoxia by reducing the load of phosphorus. When we looked at harmful algal blooms, we put together a modeling team that evaluated 3 models for the Western Basin. That modeling team, led by Joe DePinto and Don Scavia, Joe DePinto from Limnotech and Don Scavia from University of Michigan, brought in 25 of the best modelers from around the country. For the Central Basin, we used 6 models. The strategy, again, to produce a load to the Central Basin coming from the Western and the Central Basin with a goal of having an average dissolved oxygen concentration in the Central Basin, hypolimnetic or cold bottom layer, of more than 2 milligrams per liter. Focused for the Central Basin on the annual load of phosphorus. We again used the 2008 year. All 6 models that the modeling team looked at showed that the load recommended by TINCA of 6,000 tons would raise that average dissolved oxygen in the cold bottom layer to above 2 milligrams per liter. And that 6,000 ton load to the Central Basin was about a 40% reduction to the Central Basin from the 2008 load. The idea of getting the dissolved oxygen layer or the dissolved oxygen in that cold bottom layer above 2 milligrams per liter, what we were trying to do was to maintain dissolved oxygen above 0 in the surface layer of sediment. And in the process, theoretically, we will reduce the amount of phosphorus released from the sediments and therefore reduce the internal loading of phosphorus to Lake Erie. And again, to achieve that, we need to reduce Western Basin loads and Central Basin loads by 40%. We look at the last 13 years, and from satellite data, we can see that the blooms first started appearing in 2002, and you can see through 2014 what the bloom looked like, with the very large bloom in 2011, the largest that we've ever seen, and the small bloom in 2012. If I could ask Dr. Johnson to come back up with me. What Dr. Johnson has done on this particular image is we've taken the spring load of total phosphorus and and the flow-weighted mean concentration. And Laura, could you sort of walk us through your flow-weighted mean concentration for the 3-year running average?
Sure, yeah. So this is showing the spring-only flow-weighted mean concentration from 2000 through 2015. So this is where we are currently. I've highlighted here 2008 since that is the target year. And then this line shows here the total phosphorus target flow-weighted mean that we would like to get to. You can see that we've been fairly stable in terms of a running average over that season. Now, if we reach this 0.23, you can then see in this bar chart over here, we've got the observed data in the gray, the hashed ones are the targets. So if we first focus on 2008, you can see what we observed in 2008. If we reach the target, which also happens to be where this line is, that's where our target load would be, then you'd see we'd have that's a 2012 size bloom.
Right.
Right? If we then take that flow-weighted mean and apply it to the rest of the years, we can see that many of the years we are above that target, and we were observed some years we were below, like 2012. But among most of the years, if we had reached this flow-weighted mean, our target load would then have been below, at or below what that target load would be.
So the horizontal line on this chart is the target load of 860 tons from the Maumee River. And for each of the years, 2000 through 2015, we see first what you observed, and then if we were able to achieve a 0.23 milligram per liter flow-weighted mean concentration, so if we were able to get the flow-weighted mean concentration down to that, we would then have the vast majority of those years we would have had a bloom less than the bloom that we saw in 2012.
Correct. And as we're going right now, even right now, given, that same target, we would probably be very close to a 2012 bloom.
2012 bloom,
yeah.
If we were able to get it down to the flow-weighted mean concentration. Very good.
Yep. So this figure is essentially the same set of figures, but now for dissolved phosphorus instead of total phosphorus. You see the same figure on the left here with the flow-weighted mean concentrations. There's a slight increase here over time since 2000, 2008 again here in red. And then the 0.05 is the target flow-weighted mean concentration for the spring for the Maumee River. Again, if we applied that to the observed data, you can see we have a number of very large years here above what the actual target load is. If you look at 2008, you can see that since that's our base year, this line, which is the target load, matches perfectly with the hash target bar shows. And then again, under most circumstances, our target load would have been below what the actual load is, so we would expect a 2012 size bloom under most of these years. Only 2011 and it looks like 2003 would exceed those. 2015 looks almost identical to total phosphorus so far.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. And as we look at this also, and you see the target of 186, if you think about a way of looking at this, here's what the load was in 2008. A 40% reduction takes us down to the 186. All right, what we've tried to do here is just help people picture what a 40% reduction might really look like. And so the years that we have shown at the top is 2008, in the middle is 2011, and at the bottom is 2012. The goal is to produce a bloom that looks like 2012 or less 9 years out of 10. So in 2008, if we had a bloom that looks like the top one in 2008 and we had a 40% reduction, we would have made that bloom look like 2012, the bottom one. If we had a bloom that looked like 2011, the middle one, and we achieved a 40% reduction, we would have made that bloom look like the bloom of 2008, the top one. That's what you see. That's what the recommendations of the task team would produce. What I've got now, these are the loads that Dr. Johnson has observed to date, and so this is just about through the end of June. You can see the load from the Maumee River is 1,586 tons. A 40% reduction takes that down to 897 tons, and the target is actually 860 tons. So you can see that this year we're a little bit over our target, even with the 40% reduction. And as we look at the soluble reactive, same thing is seen. We're at 396 currently observed, and if we achieved a 40% reduction, we would still be over our target load this year of 186. But again, very close. So if we were, right now, if we didn't get any more phosphorus going in, and we were able to achieve a 40% reduction, we'd be very close to producing a bloom that looked like 2012. Dr. Stump, if you could come back up. What we've tried to do here is take Dr. Stump's model, and Rick, I'll let you sort of talk us through this, because I think what you've done here is shown us what a 40% reduction would have done to your forecast.
The forecast that we had given earlier is shown up at the top here, and right at this point, if we reduce the phosphorus by 40%, and it depends on which several ways to compute this, I won't go into that, we end up with a range of numbers, and the severity would drop potentially well below the 2014, and put it down at a level that certainly would be much milder than what we've observed before. We wouldn't get quite to the 2012 severity with this, but it would be a significant reduction in what the potential biomass that would occur if we had that in place.
Thanks very much, Rick. And Chris, with that, I'm going to call up Gail. First, Chris, if you would tell us a little bit about the 18 projects that we're currently working on. These are new research projects from the Ohio Department of Higher Education, and I believe we can see the results on those projects on the Sea Grant website.
Correct. So thanks for that introduction, Jeff. So what we're looking at here, my 5 minutes that I want to take at a time on this webinar really is to introduce you to 18 projects, or the focus areas that 18 projects reside in, that money is coming from. Historically, we refer to them as the Board of Regents projects, but they're now technically falling under the Ohio Department of Higher Education. Basically $2 million that has been allocated over 8 universities, and again, 18 different projects. And I'd like to highlight also that those 18 different projects have more than one principal investigator, or PI, on them. So there's actually a lot of research effort directed towards these projects. The other thing I'd like to highlight before I quickly go through the 5 focus areas is that for the selection of these projects, not only the selection, but the guidance as these projects move forward over the next 2 years, we have an advisory board in place that has representatives from Ohio EPA, Ohio DNR, the Department of Health, Department of Agriculture, and with the Lake Erie Commission. So definitely these projects are being guided by individuals that know what the state's goals are and their directive. So again, $2 million allocated over 5 focus areas. The intent of this is not to give you details into all of the 18 projects. These have really just started their progress here in the early spring. Their first annual report to us, or update to us, will be in late October. Really what I want to do is highlight that these projects exist, and I will try and back out of this and also show you the website that they're located on, where you could actually read the details of each project. But the first of the 5 focus areas, as you can see on the webinar on the slide, Lake Erie Habs and lake water quality. Basically, the 2 projects that reside within this focus area are looking to find how we can detect and map these harmful algal blooms. I would also argue, as you can see on the slide, this allows us also to have a warning network in place. So as we're getting better at detecting these harmful algal blooms in the lake, using weather patterns and water currents, this will also allow us, the research that comes out of these 2 projects will allow us to hopefully fine-tune our warning network. The next focus area that we have that actually contains multiple projects is producing safe drinking water. And so basically, we know that with this this recommendation of a 40% reduction in phosphorus, we need to recognize that this isn't going to happen overnight, and that what's put in place to lower these loads may take 5-10 years to accomplish. What we know is that we can't have this year or any of the upcoming years issues with drinking water and having another Toledo water crisis. We can't have individuals that rely on Lake Erie for water unable to access that water. So the projects that are within this focus area are really there to arm water treatment plant operators with the tools, technologies, and training to remove those toxins. And within this focus area, I believe there's 7 different projects ranging from how to test and detect the toxins to different techniques or ways to remove the toxins, even looking at how long do those toxins remain in the water system before the water is safe to drink. As far as focus area number 3, land use practices, source enrichment, and water quality and engineered systems, really what we're looking at, as I show you here within the parentheses, is edge of field monitoring, and also looking at different BMPs or best management practices to help aid that reduction in nutrient loading. Multiple projects also reside within this focus area. The 4th focus area is human health and toxicity. This kind of echoes the statements I was making with focus area number 2. Is again, this process of lowering our nutrient loads into the lake is going to be a process that takes some time. But we really need to know right now what is the human health risk right now. And so it's critically important for us to do things like look at that fish tissue and see if fish that reside in those blooms that are producing toxins are safe to eat. We also know that there is some liver impacts from these specific toxins, Microsystem specifically, and so really assessing how that toxin might affect different sectors of the population. One that's not mentioned up here that I think is an important question that we're addressing through these projects is even using water that might have toxins in it when you spray that on produce that individuals are growing. Is that produce then able to be consumed without any ramifications to that? So really, focus areas 2 and 4 specifically are really to get us answers right now that might address any toxin issues that happen this year or before we get to that 40% reduction in loading. The 5th and final focus area that we have is economics and policy. So basically what we're looking at here is when we try and make these changes based on land use practices and edge of field monitoring and placement of BMPs, how can we make these projects hit the ground? And how can we make these things so that they're feasible as far as the funding to support them, and also really to inform policy based on the findings from these 4 previous focus areas. I do want to highlight that, again, this has been a fantastic partnership. It was amazing when this initiative first started. We had many scientists, I would say 50, 60 scientists in one room, really having very intelligent, very high-level discussions related to how we whittle this problem that we have in Lake Erie down to 8 neat projects. There's those 8 universities, the one I would like to highlight specifically is that the University of Toledo has used the money that they've gotten through this grant to leverage other funds to continue or build on the work that their PIs or co-PIs on, principal investigators or co-principal investigators. And so everybody that's associated with this project has been very proactive to use these funds to leverage other funds and to initiate other projects. And so it's been a very exciting movement forward as far as adding knowledge to the problem that we're facing right now. So with that, Jeff, the next individual that we have, actually I'll just introduce since I'm up here. The next individual I'd like to call up is Jay Martin, and Jay Martin is going to speak to us today about a field to faucet project. So it's a project that's coming out of Ohio State University, the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. And so I'm going to let Jay lead you through this initiative.
Thank you, Chris. And similar to Chris, I want to highlight some of the new projects that we are undertaking in the field to faucet program right now at Ohio State. And before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about the field to faucet approach. We've talked a little bit about problems last year with drinking water in Toledo. There's also been drinking water problems last year in Monroe, Michigan, and Pele Island, and also the year before in 2013 in Carroll Township, Ohio. So we've seen a trend of these drinking water problems The harmful algae is going to be there, as has been forecast for this year, and so there's going to be the potential for these drinking water problems in the future. And one of the things we need to do as we diligently start to reduce the amount of phosphorus coming into Lake Erie is maintain safe drinking water, as Chris just mentioned. So it's really important to have end-to-end solutions. So while we focus on what's happening on the farm fields, also focus on what's happening at the other end of the system, at the drinking water end of that. So end-to-end solutions is one of the big focuses of field to faucet. That's the whole idea of the name, field to faucet. Another thing, so with this, we're looking at sustainable food supply and safe water. Another important aspect of field to faucet is to accelerate applications. I'm going to talk soon about the ongoing projects that have just started with field to faucet. There's 5 of those that complement the projects from the Ohio Department of Higher Education. What's really important here is to not only have the research be completed, but have applications that really matter, what's happening on the field, what's happening within the drinking water treatment plants. And lastly, it's always important to collaborate across and with other agencies and universities to identify and address knowledge gaps. As we move forward, it's important to note that there's a vast amount of expertise that we have here in the state of Ohio and across the Midwest, with a lot of different areas here, BMPs, watershed modeling, water quality data from Heidelberg, and other things I could mention here. So we don't have to completely reinvent the wheel. We know some of this information as we move forward. That being said, I want to spend most of my time highlighting the 5 projects that have been funded through Field to Faucet. So Field to Faucet was launched in the fall of 2014. $1 million investment from the College of Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Sciences, and that $1 million went to support these 5 initial projects. The first 2 I want to talk about are circled at the bottom of this slide, and they do focus on what's happening mostly on the farm field. The first of those I want to talk about is the Data Cooperative. This is a little bit bigger than the farm field, actually, so this is taking some of the information that Laura talked about earlier. We have good information on water quality from across the basin. We have information on soils. We have information on slope, about land uses, but there's no real central place where most of us can find that information. So the data co-op, the idea is to bring that information together in a place where researchers and farmers, fertilizer applicators can find that information and use it to limit the amount of nutrients that are coming off the landscape. Second project I'm going to talk about are field management applications. The idea here is to take some of that information that will be stored on that co-op, stored in other places, and get it into the hands of farmers where it can be utilized in the ways so farmers can best apply nutrients to their fields. One of the key aspects we're working on here is a storm forecasting system to warn farmers of impending storm events so they know better when or when not to apply fertilizers. And the key thing here is to get that information right to the cab of the tractor where the farmers can best utilize it. Moving on to the other projects, these projects are focused on drinking water treatment plants and developing real-time microsystem detection capabilities. Right now, we don't have that ability, so a sample of microsystem is grabbed, it's sent to a lab to be analyzed, and then that information gets back to the drinking water treatment plant hours later, maybe even a day later, so the drinking water treatment plant is basing their treatment on old information. So if we can have real-time microsystem concentrations, it'll go a long way to helping drinking water treatment plants better treat their water and maintain safe drinking water. 2 of the approaches we're following here. One is a microsystem detector, which you can actually put in the water and detect microsystem that way. The other one is a bloom detection through UAVs or through satellites. So we have a double-pronged approach to try to develop real-time microsystem concentrations. And the last project that we're behind right now is manure recycling, and the idea here is to strip out some of the nutrients from manures, to strip out the nitrogen and phosphorus before the manure is applied to the field. By doing that, it will lower the amount of risk of these nutrients running off the field and entering our waterways. These are the 5 initial projects that we're pursuing with Field to Faucet. I also want to quickly mention that there's some important other current activities that Field to Faucet is involved with. One of those is the Fertilizer Applicator Certification Training. This is something that came out of some of the recent policy from the Ohio legislature. So through this, already more than 6,500 farmers have been trained about the best ways to apply fertilizer to their fields, and this accounts for over 1 million acres in the state of Ohio. Recently, there was a RCPP award through the USDA, and this came via a tri-state partnership with Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana. And this $17.5 million is being used for cost share so that farmers can help farmers implement these different BMPs like drainage water management on their lands. We're also developing a risk management tool which will warn farmers of impending storms. This is a partnership with NOAA, Ohio Department of Agriculture, and Ohio State University. And lastly, we're starting to develop a BMP handbook. So there's a lot of different best management practices out there. Many of them are helpful, but they're not all applicable to every farm. So the idea here is for a farmer to be able to enter in the slope of their field, the soil type that they have, the types of crops that they're farming. And with this best management practice handbook tool, the farmers will be able to know what types of BMPs will be most applicable to their farm, give them the best bang for the buck in terms of agronomic returns and in terms of water quality benefits. With that, I'd just like to quickly acknowledge some of the important partners we're working with Field to Faucet. We wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for our partners, and thanks to Jeff and Chris for giving us this spot in the program.
Thanks very much, Jay. Always a pleasure to have Dr. Martin up here, and on the last two speakers, Dr. Chris Winslow, our interim director up here, it was really a pleasure for me to sort of turn over the reins to somebody I trust so much, and you've done a great job, Chris. And Jay, Dr. Jay Martin, the faculty lead, professor at OSU in the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences, and the faculty lead on the Field to Faucet project. Those 23 projects are really kind of producing the information and the results that we need to produce the targeted BMPs and to protect human health. Next speaker, Gail Hess, great friend with the executive director of the Ohio Lake Erie Commission. And Gail has just done a fabulous job. She was the chair of our Ohio Phosphorus Task Force, did a wonderful job, and Gail showed us that she has such fantastic facilitation skills that she also served on our Annex 4 subcommittee, or the Annex 4 task team that focused on the objectives and the targets to solve this problem, and we asked Gail to facilitate all of our meetings. So Gail, if you could tell us a little bit about the accomplishments, the things that have occurred since our Phosphorus Task Force report came out in 2013, and maybe even since we started meeting prior to that. So Gail Hess.
Thanks, Jeff. I have no slides for you today, so I'll just share a few comments with you. And certainly there are many, many accomplishments to report on, certainly as a result of the leadership at Ohio EPA, the Ohio DNR, the Ohio Department of Agriculture, and the Ohio General Assembly. What I'd like to focus on today are several of the recommendations that were in the Phosphorus Task Force report, and to give some highlighted attention to those. Certainly one of the most pivotal recommendations that we had was in that 40% reduction. And that 40% has been a number that's been widely accepted and reflected in a whole variety of reports. And as you heard about the Annex 4 targets, that while the Phosphorus Task Force was looking at primarily the Western Basin, the Annex 4 task team looked at all of Lake Erie. And certainly that's where a significant amount of the science, the modeling, and some pretty intensive effort went into play to come up with, again, a 40% target. But what's affirming about that is that it does tell us that the science coalesces around that reduction goal of 40%, and as most recently reflected in the collaboration agreement between Ohio, Michigan, and the province of Ontario. The second recommendation I'd like to focus on is one from the task force that talked about the need for an adaptive management approach as well as an expanded monitoring program. And in the last couple of years, both state and federal funding has resulted in 21 new stations in the Maumee and the Sandusky basins. And these new stations are at or near the mouths of the major tributaries in these river basins, and that will help us tell the story of what's getting into the lake. And as we are also working on some ways and opportunities and options for how we can reflect the information that's learned through these monitoring stations and provide that in an easy-to-understand format for our key stakeholders. What's also key to focus in on here is that it will be important to look at the information that we pull from these monitoring stations over time, that we cannot look at the data from these stations as 1 year in isolation, because as we have heard that there's such widely varying weather conditions from year to year, that 1 year in and of itself will not tell us the level of reduction, but it's really about looking at the trend over time. Thirdly, I'd like to mention the focus in the task force report on the need for on-the-ground practices and the enormous investment that's being made in conservation practices, as well as the call for the connection of those practices to better soil health and how that applies to nutrient management. Here again, enormous investment from the state and federal agencies on different practices in Ohio, both coming into Ohio itself as well as the recently announced RCPP program, which involves Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana. Ohio EPA is also piloting some new approaches to cost share practices and looking at performance reimbursement approaches to cost share as a way of looking at some new techniques for how we deliver some of these practices. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention what's happening on the private side, in that we know that we've got many, many individual agricultural producers implementing practices on their own without cost share support. But also, we also know that through the 4R certification program, that more than 500,000 acres in the Maumee River Basin are now being managed under the auspices of the 4R program. And what we expect to see is certainly nutrient reductions as a result of all of that investment, but we also know that that will be cumulative over time. And so that while in years of high rainfall events, that while we still expect to see some of those benefits gain over time in the high rainfall events as well as the low rainfall events. Also wanted to mention in the task force report the emphasis on research and the tools that we need in going forward to both answer some of the unanswered science questions that we have, as well as the tools that agricultural operators can use on the ground. There has been a big emphasis on the edge of field research that's being led by Dr. Kevin King in partnership with many collaborators, including supporters from the agricultural industry. This research will help us understand which practices and in what combination will make the most difference to nutrient management. It will also help us understand how to better manage the tile drainage that we have in Northwest Ohio and the drainage management practices that are coming to bear in terms of demonstrating results in nutrient reductions. Those results will also be used in updating a tool that can be used by farmers to better evaluate the risk potential for runoff. This is referred to as the Phosphorus Risk Index, and this is a project that is yet to get underway because it needs the data and the results from Dr. King's research to be able to update that tool. But I believe that this tool will be an important piece going forward in helping agricultural producers make decisions that are unique to their operations. So overall, just wanted to say that there's been an enormous investment that's being put in both on-the-ground practices, research and tools, monitoring so that we can understand our trends, but also in building partnerships and collaborative agreements. There's a value in groups like the Phosphorus Task Force in that it provides a forum for the different disciplines of agriculture, the science of agriculture, the science of water resources, the ability to bring those disciplines together to be able to vet what we're learning from the science, have deliberative conversations about the implications of that science, and to be able to use that to inform the policies and programs that we need to achieve nutrient reductions for a healthy Lake Erie. So thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Gail. I'd like to ask Joe DePinto if he would come up. Dr. DePinto is a senior scientist with Limno Tech. Joe and I go way back, and within our Annex 4 task team, about 25 members, very much binational, all the states and provinces represented. Then we had a 25-member task team focused on the objectives and targets. Joe was a member of that task team, And we also asked Joe to be one of the co-chairs of another team, subcommittee of our task team, the 25 modelers. And Joe I think, Joe, what you're going to show us is a movie and get an idea of what this phosphorus load might have looked like.
Yeah, this is not available on Netflix yet anyway. we'll get to it.
Joe, when you're ready, play,
yeah.
And you'll be able to pause.
Right, good, thanks. Yeah. What you're going to see here is a series of animations from 4 different years, 2011, 2012, 2014, and 2015 through the 1st of July. And then we project after that for this big event that we've just had. So this is model output from our WLEAM model, stands for Western Lake Erie Ecosystem Model. As Jeff said, it's one of the 3 models that have been used as the ensemble in the forecasting here, and also one of the 3 models used for the Annex 4 target loading. This model has been corroborated with data for 2008, 2011, 12, and 13, and 14 successfully, and so we have a lot of confidence in it. But it's a very different model from the statistical models, the other 2 models that are being used here. It's a process-based finite segment, finite fine scale model that allows you to look at not just the total biomass of Habs that are produced over the course of a season on the basis of the total load from the Maumee River, but actually allows you to look at how the system might be behaving differently from one year to the other with regard to the spatial and temporal profiles of various constituents, including Habs. What I'm going to show you today is just total phosphorus, but as you know, total phosphorus is what drives the Hab production. At least it's the major source. And the other thing about the model is that it includes all of the phosphorus loads and other nutrient, nitrogen, et cetera, loads to the Western Basin, not just the Maumee. And so what you see when you see the phosphorus concentrations in the basin, it is the cumulative effect of all of these loads, not just the Maumee. And that includes the Detroit River load as well. The interesting thing is, of course, that the Maumee has such a high concentration of phosphorus in its flow that well, you'll see the plumes as I go through here. And the main thing I want you to look at is in 2011, this was the kind of perfect storm year for the blooms, and we had large events early and then another one towards the end of May. And so you'll see sort of early high phosphorus concentrations early in the spring. In 2012, of course, that was the really dry, low year, and so you won't see much at all in the way of phosphorus concentrations in the basin. 2014, this was the Toledo Crisis, and what you'll see is towards in June and July, you'll see high concentrations along the southern shore, in Maumee Bay and along the southern shore. And then in 2015, what you see is what looks like kind of a repeat of 2011. But instead of all of the phosphorus coming in the spring, in March and April and May, it's coming in June and July. And so you'll see the big plumes later on. All right, so that's kind of a preview of coming attractions. Let's go through that now. So you can see now we're into April, and we're seeing well, we saw a big event in 2011, and this is kind of between events, and get into May and big events in May in 2011, just putting more phosphorus into the lake. One thing that's evident in all of these is that the Detroit River has 95% of the flow into the western basin, but it's a very low phosphorus concentration. It's less than 20 micrograms per liter, less than 0.02 milligrams per liter. And so you don't see a plume of total phosphorus there relative to what's coming out of the Maumee. And throughout the year, we see relatively low concentrations in 2012 throughout the basin, and that's because it was such a dry year and such low. Now we get into June, and boom, there goes 2015. Big events in June. It's already been said that June is it's the highest flow on record for Heidelberg. Rick said it's the fourth highest precipitation on record, period, for the Weather Service, and it's showing up as lots of phosphorus out in the western basin, and so this is why we're expecting and forecasting a pretty high and pretty severe bloom this year, because that phosphorus is still out there. You're looking at the date of July 2nd, and so as soon as the sun comes out, as soon as it gets warm, these guys will have plenty of nutrients to take off. So
thanks, Rick.
Yep, that's.
Yeah, I'm not going to let you talk anymore unless you show better pictures. Thanks very much, Joe. With that, I'm going to turn this back over to Dr. Winslow. I think, Dr. Winslow, you're going to show us maybe a quick website.
Yep, so Ohio Sea Grant's got a website coming up that we're pulling up right now, so you can access. This is where you're going to find all the resources that you might request of us for this. There's some video clips on here. There's some fact sheets that are on here. The links to the grants that I refer to, so formerly the Board of Regents grants, but now the Ohio Department of Higher Education, are listed here. Also, the 5 field to faucet projects that Jay Martin introduced us to are on this web link. So you can see right where the cursor is now. Those are the Ohio Board of Regents projects and the field to faucet projects. So if you actually click on one of those, if you could, Christina, for me, please. This takes you into basically our website, and here they are listed. Each one of those hyperlinks that you click, so the first one, RHAB1BOR, if you click on that, if you want to know what the project is, here are the objectives clearly listed out for you. Also, you'll see at the top are the principal investigators and the associate investigators, not only with their contact information, but also the university that they're associated with. So please come to Ohio Sea Grant with any questions, OSU Stone Lab, but also we're trying to make this available so that you can talk to the boots on the ground. You can talk to that PI at their respective university. So going back to our website here, so the other things you'll see on the left-hand side, we've got fact sheets that are listed, also some other handouts that are available. And you'll see, the watch the webinar and all of these different links. So, experts, some related links that are on there. Also, if you could go to GLOSS, the website that's on there in the bottom left. I'm doing this, Tom Bridgman had brought this up earlier. Great Lakes Observing System. And so on this website, this is going to show you where those 25 some odd buoys are located in the lake. So if you go to this website, see how quickly it loads for us here. Basically, you're going to be able to hover over all of those buoys, and it'll give you the information that each one of those buoys are producing in real time. So we got a little bit of a delay here. Yep. Tom?
They're not showing up at this main page yet. There's a sub-page where all the buoys are.
Okay, and so can we, I'll get that link from you as soon as we're done with this, and we'll make it available on the website. But on this GLOSS website, this is the series of Great Lakes Observing System buoys. But as Tom Bridgman just mentioned, we'll get the actual direct link to the ones that are related to Habs issue going on right now. So if you could go back again, there's the website that you're going to want to take yourself to. And please, there's tons of resources on you. We hope that they're on here. I hope that you can find this useful. And a lot of the individuals that you might want to contact are also on here. Last plug that I'll put for the very bottom before we start taking questions. We have 4 different workshops that we offer this summer. 2 are on algal identification workshops. They're 2-day workshops. And then dealing with cyanobacteria, algal toxins, and taste and odor compounds, also 2-day workshops that we're offering up here. So if you're interested in either of those workshops, please contact me with that information. With that, I'd like to, Tom, did you have a question?
If you put that gloss makeup, one more.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're doing that, if we could have the speakers that were up earlier, go ahead.
Go to data access. The green one, yes. No. At the top there, next to home. Yes. At the bottom, have the data viewer.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom.
That's the one that will show you.
Good. And so with that, I'd love to have the speakers that just left the stage for us come up towards the front so we can all be by the phone. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to turn over to, I believe, Matt Thomas. Have you been summarizing and fielding the questions? So basically, Matt's going to read off some of the questions that he's summarized as these presentations were going on. And basically, we just want to answer all the questions that we can during the allotted time that we have, which, Jill, I believe that's 4 o'clock is when the webinar closes. So we have roughly, I think, about 45 minutes, actually about a half an hour to field some questions.
And so, Matt, we're not looking at a camera here, so if we stand around the phone here, people should be able to hear us.
All right, Matt.
Sorry, everyone has to be up
Okay,
front.
so I'm paraphrasing a lot of these. First question, why was 2008 chosen as a year from which to set the targets?
We chose 2008, this is Jeff Reuter, because of the size of the discharge. The discharge in 2008 was a large discharge from the Maumee River, so large that it was only exceeded about 10% of the time in the last 20 years. It's a big load year. If we can reduce that load and produce a bloom the size of 2012, then in years when the load was not as large, the other 90% of the time, we would have even smaller blooms. So we chose what was essentially a pretty bad year to use as our base year for reductions.
Jeff, if I can add to that, I pulled up a slide from your PowerPoint presentation. If you look at 28, you're seeing the annual discharge for that year was 8 billion cubic meters. Relative 2011, which was the largest bloom on record, was 6.2 billion cubic meters. So it was a heavy discharge year, and you can see the annual load for that first figure, too, is 3,800 metric tons relative to, again, 2011, which was 3,000 metric tons. So that's kind of the reference points for you.
Right, and I think, Dr. Pino, you wanted to add something to it?
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say that there's another reason. 2008, the total annual phosphorus load to all of Lake Erie was something like 10,650 metric tons, which is very close to the 11,000 metric tons per year that was set back in the 70s as the target load for the previous target load for Lake Erie. So it allowed us to sort of compare with the way things used to be. And the difference, of course, is that when we got there then, we didn't see these kind of blooms. So something has changed, and that's what we're working on, is to figure out exactly what's changed in the lake.
Very good. Thanks, Joe.
So another question with a follow-up question. Will the science be good enough to set targets for the Eastern Basin? With the follow-up of, shouldn't the interim concentration target remain in place until then?
The question is, when will the science be good enough to set targets for the Eastern Basin, and shouldn't we have an interim target in the meantime? And I'll turn this one over to Tinka.
Sure. So my understanding is Environment Canada has some research going on right now. I understand that they're trying to wrap that up in the next several months. In addition, there is a group of researchers that is going to be coming together in the fall to talk about some of the challenges with Cladophora, and identify a path forward for how we can address that. So I know there is a large interest and a desire to try to get something set in the near term, but it's going to be a function of where the data is and what kind of outcomes we get from the research. So you're going to have to stay tuned for that. And then in terms of interim targets, the interim targets that were in the original agreement would stand. We don't have any data we don't have enough confidence in the information to be able to establish an interim target at this point.
And in many ways, if the person that submitted that question had the opportunity to look at the annex for our subcommittee report, they would see a lot more of the science behind this discussion. We know the things that we do to reduce the loads to the western and the central basin will reduce the open lake concentration of phosphorus in the eastern basin. So the eastern basin concentration will go down, but the science doesn't allow us to determine will that reduction in the open lake concentration of phosphorus have an impact on the cladophora concentrations, or is the cladophora in the eastern basin driven by the tributary loads from the eastern basin tributaries? And that's where we can't, that's where we're limited right now. Matt, you have another question?
Yeah. What percent of the load into the Maumee is coming from farm fields, and what type of ag management is responsible?
Some estimations. Right now, the load coming from farm fields for the Maumee River is going to be larger than, say, the percentage of loads coming from farm fields for the Cuyahoga River at Cleveland. The Cuyahoga River is primarily an urban tributary. The Maumee River is primarily an ag tributary. So you would expect to see larger numbers. The runoff, and this is data that Laura Johnson can explain very well, but the runoff from the Maumee, or runoff from agricultural fields, is going to come in when it's raining. If it's not raining, you're not going to get any load from ag fields. So you have a dry year like 2012, the drought year that Joe showed us, your percentage of load from agriculture will be lower than when you have a wet year like 2011. The blooms occur during the wet year, when the contribution is therefore large from the agricultural fields. And in years like 11, 12, 13, 14, Laura, Joe, correct me, we're looking at the agricultural component probably up around 80%.
Yeah, based off of the work from Dave Dolan and Matt McCoo, Maumee River on average, 90% of the total phosphorus load is non-point source runoff. And then most of that land is agricultural, so we attribute a good portion of that to agriculture. So saying 80% is probably about accurate.
Joe, comfortable with that?
Yeah, on an annual basis.
Yep, on an
that
annual
percentage will change seasonally,
Exactly.
change yearly, like you said, but sort of a long-term average.
Yep.
Okay, Matt.
Here's a question more for Joe DePinto. How much in-lake phosphorus data are there available to validate the W-lean model projections?
Question was sort of how much in-lake phosphorus data do we have to validate Joe's Western Lake Erie lean model projections?
More than any other lake I know about. There's been an awful lot of measurements. The University of Toledo, Bowling Green, NOAA, Glurl, Ohio State. Who?
Seiler?
Seiler, University of Michigan, right? That's associated with Glurl. EPA certainly, and Environment Canada. And so we look at all of those data. And the nice thing about it is they take measurements at different places at different points in time in the system. And to the extent that you trust them, and I do, that gives us a really good data set to check these models against, to evaluate them, and to compare. So and those measurements there are measurements also of blue-green algal population, biomass, and especially Toledo does that regularly, and Glural. So there's lots of data, and that's what us modelers like. We're datavores, and so that's why we feel pretty comfortable with making these forecasts with the model.
Thanks, Joe.
Concerning Annex 4, one objective is to maintain a healthy algal community. So what does healthy algal community mean? Is this simply the absence of cyanobacteria?
Question for Annex 4. One objective was to have a healthy algal community, and what does that mean? Does it simply mean the absence of cyanobacteria or blue-green algae? That's one of the definitions of a healthy algae community, but one of the other ones is what we're focused on in the Central Basin, and it's in the Eastern Basin, where you have excessive growths of a single form of algae like Cladophora. So what you're looking for with the healthy algal community is a richness in species diversity and the absence of a single species dominance. Anybody else want to add to that?
Tom, do you want to add to that comment?
You want algae that are a good base for the fishery, for the grazing food chain of the lake. Blue-greens don't provide good food for the base of the food chain for the fish, and neither do Cladophora. That's why we would rather not have them.
Great.
When will TMDLs for phosphorus be done for the Western Basin?
When will TMDLs for phosphorus be done for the Western Basin of Lake Erie?
So TMDLs are an effort that the states do, and because the Western Basin is multi-state and multi-country, it gets a lot more complicated. We need everyone to agree that there needs to be work done on that. That said, the Canadians don't have a concept called TMDLs, but the Annex 4 work essentially looks a whole lot like a TMDL, and this information will be helpful to make decisions up in the watersheds as we move forward. So I'm not sure that we will actually produce a Western Basin TMDL because of those jurisdictional issues I just spoke to, but it doesn't mean we can't move forward to address the problems and solve the problems through the domestic action plans through implementation.
And I was also in a conversation with another person at EPA, and she was going to compare the current TMDLs that exist for some of the tributaries to the targets that are being set with the Annex 4, and so that's another part of it. It's not like they're not in concert.
Right, absolutely. There are plenty of TMDLs already in place in Ohio for several of the tributaries that flow into the Western Basin, and we will then be looking at those and talking with Ohio about whether any changes need to occur based on this new information we have.
With regard to border regions funded projects, how does the first focus area, Habs detection, mapping, warning, etc., dovetail with the work already being done through NOAA and their forecasting?
The question is, how does the first Board of Regents focus area, the projects in there, dovetail with the forecasting being done by NOAA? And I'm going to ask Tom Bridgman from University of Toledo, who's the, on each one of the 5 focus areas, we have 2 scientists serving as the co-chairs of that focus area, and Tom is one of those scientists.
The early warning system that's being supported by the Department of Higher Education at Ohio focuses on sensors in the lake that are detecting the pigment associated with the blue-green algae and allowing the water utilities along the lake to have an advance warning of when the algae might be approaching their intakes. And those are concentrated in the Western Basin near Toledo and also near Sandusky as well. These are coordinated with some of the NOAA efforts, particularly the NOAA buoys that are going in also. We talked about locations of these buoys ahead of time to get the best possible coverage of the area so that we will eventually generate really a map of where the Habs are, not just a map associated with remote sensing, but a map associated with in situ sensing of the pigments in the water as well. So right now those buoys are up and running, and anyone can go to the website and see what the pigments of the algae are. And I expect at some point these might feed into forecasts going along with some of the things that Joe DePinto is doing. We'll get some forecasts based on the data from those buoys as well.
And I think Dr. Stump, you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, in the NOAA forecast bulletin system, we are working towards more sophisticated, more advanced modeling of the distribution of blooms in 3 dimensions, and we're looking at these sensors to help inform that and actually guide input into those models. So we will be seeing changes in what we're producing in NOAA for models based on this kind of sensor data.
Kind of a follow-up to that, when will the results of the projects in the 5 focus areas be available?
Good. So this is Chris Winslow. So we have quarterly conference calls with those individuals, those PIs on those projects, and we can modify what you saw on the website where those projects are listed as those quarterly conference calls happen. But also on October 31st is a deadline for the first written report back from those principal investigators. And as soon as that report comes back in, that data will be posted on that website. And so as soon as we get updates, we will make it available on that website that I showed you. So the Board of Regents list and the Field to Faucet list is the same for that.
They're 2-year projects, right?
They are your 2-year projects, and thanks for bringing that up, Laura. This is money that came from the Ohio Department of Higher Education. They wanted a definite answer. They want projects that are these packages that can come in 2 years and answer some questions that are critically important. So there is a quick deadline to these. So there'll be an October 31st written report for 2015, and there'll also be another updated written report for 2016, and we'll make those available. After the completion of that also, part of Sea Grant's role in this is managing these funds is to write a synthesis report of all the projects and pull it together. So at the culmination of the 2-year project, you will see a synthesis report come out of that.
And Chris, the end of the project is June 30th, 2017.
2017, correct.
I'll just add to that. This is Jay Martin from Ohio State. That after the project's end, an important step is going to be working with Ohio State University Extension personnel to take those results, get them on the field, so have them be a part of the fertilizer training programs and things like that, so we get these results on the field where they make a difference as fast as possible.
And that mirrors Ohio Sea Grant's mission too. So we have 5 extension agents based across the 8 counties on Lake Erie, and that's our purpose too. As these updates come in, that information gets into the hand of our extension educators, and they'll be able to disseminate this information broadly too. That's the key part of both this Field to Faucet and the money from the Ohio Department of Higher Education is it's not learning that happens in an isolated bubble that comes out in one peer review manuscript and is presented at a regional conference. This is supposed to be stuff that gets into the stakeholders' hands as quickly as possible. Matt?
How does the phosphorus from the previous year affect the current year Hab formation?
So the question is, how does the phosphorus from the previous year impact the current year's bloom situation?
I'm going to say a couple things about that and then let Joe and Rick, the modelers, also comment if they want to. In many ways, when you think of the previous year's phosphorus, that is in the lake, and it's residing in essentially the sediment, or else it has passed through the entire lake and gone over Niagara Falls. In the Western Basin, the material moves through relatively quickly, and I believe one of the earlier questions, I'm getting two events today confused possibly, internal loading, or the loading from the sediment in the Western Basin, is a relatively small proportion of the total load. All of the models that we've talked about today are based on the annual external load of phosphorus, not the internal load. And Joe and Rick, correct me if I'm wrong there. But when we get to the Central Basin, the answer to the question gets a little trickier because it's more likely for phosphorus to accumulate and reside within Central Basin sediments much deeper in that area. And that's one of the reasons that really our goal within Annex 4 was to maintain average dissolved oxygen levels in the Central Basin hypolimnetic area, that cold bottom layer, keep the average DO above 2, and therefore, theoretically, we would reduce the amount of internal loading from the sediments, and so the phosphorus from, say, our past SINs, previous years, would be less likely to impact us. Joe and Rick, do you want to add to that? Tom, whoever?
I guess what Jeff said is accurate. The Western Basin is shallow, but large in area, and it has an almost ongoing, every time the wind gets above about 10 miles per hour or so, 10 to 15, we get resuspension throughout almost all of the basins. And that brings phosphorus that has deposited in the sediments back up into the water column. And so there is a contribution there. But what we've seen is that as soon as it comes up, it pretty much goes back down. Not much of it actually becomes available for algal growth. In other words, released as a bioavailable form. EPA has funded a project which Gail Hess and the Ohio Lake Erie Commission is heading up that's specifically looking at the role of what people call internal loading. I prefer to call it phosphorus recycle from the sediments, but because I don't think of it as a loading. But the role of that in the phosphorus budget of the Western Basin, and that report will be coming out at the end of the year, roughly, or early winter 2016. And so we'll have I think a much better answer for that question about that time.
One of the things that last year's phosphorus would have done would be to have grown last year's cyanobacteria. And some of that cyanobacteria then resides in the sediments over the winter and is available to be kicked up and reactivated the next year. So it's not definitively proven, but it would make sense that the larger the phosphorus loading and the bloom of one year, that's more available seed stock of cyanobacteria to restart the bloom again the next year.
Just Rick Stump here, just to finish. Pretty much agree there. The recycling part, though, would be from a very large, severe bloom, high load year to a really small year is when you would start to see that difference. Because most of that doesn't transfer over, but there's potential for a small part component carrying over.
If it was really that significant, we wouldn't have seen the really low bloom condition in 2012 that we did see, and so it can't be a really big contribution.
Great, thanks, Matt. We have another question.
Yeah. Are there any objectives or recommendations for wastewater treatment plant reductions along with industrial targets, or is this generally a watershed loading concern?
This is Tinka Hyde with EPA. We will look at both wastewater point sources, wastewater treatment plants, and non-point sources. And in fact, I think Michigan and Ohio have already identified, I think, 5 large wastewater treatment plants that have enough volume that they think there's a difference that they can make if they reduce their discharges. Oh, and then there's CSO work that needs to be done. Most of the communities that have CSO contributions, combined sewer overflows, are being addressed under either permit conditions or enforcement actions in the U.S. Canada, I think, is still working on some of their CSO issues.
Tinka, let me add one thing to that, because I think your point on the identification of the 5 largest sewage treatment plants, because one of the things that was interesting, you look at all the sewage treatment plants around Lake Erie that contribute here, and the top 5 contribute 95% of the load from point sources.
Good point, yep.
So if you're focused on the top 5, you're hitting 95% of that total load.
Yep.
Great, thanks for that. Matt?
Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one more. What are the long-term effects of Habs in Lake Erie?
The question is, what are the long-term effects of Habs in Lake Erie? And I'm looking around at all the speakers, and everybody is looking around at all the other speakers.
Well,
but Joe's got some comments here.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that Habs, you know, when I think of harmful algal blooms, everyone thinks of drinking water, and certainly that is a harm. But I think of harm also to the ecosystem. And to me, the Lake Erie fishery is a world-class fishery. The production of harmful algal blooms, cyanobacteria, does not feed into the base of the food chain for that fishery. It feeds into what we call a detrital food chain, and therefore it's producing biomass, it's producing organic carbon that's not really contributing to the Great Lakes fishery. And so what we want to do is get that production into the kind of algae that will contribute to the carrying capacity of the fishery.
Just on Rick Stump here, one other component on an ecosystem impact is actually the harmful blooms do play a role in the hypoxia area, and that reduces the available habitat for the fish that we're looking for, because they can't live in low oxygen water. And so if we reduce that, that is a benefit to the ecosystem.
Great. So, Matt, you're saying, okay, so we're approaching 4 o'clock, but what I can actually mention is that we can collect the questions that we weren't able to get to on this webinar in real time, and we can pull together a Word document and answer some of those ones that we have missed. You're looking on the website right now. I've shared my screen. This is, again, the site where you can get all of this information. And when we pull those questions we might have missed because of our time constraints on the webinar, we will synthesize these into a Word document again and have the experts that were here today contribute to those answers. So I'm looking around the room seeing if we have any parting comments from any of our guest speakers. We want to thank everybody online for taking time out of your day to listen to the webinar. We all in this room recognize that this is a critical issue for the lake. And for me, it's really exciting to see all of the scientists and all of the agencies and all of the people really pulling together to work at this problem. And so let's get down to 40% reduction in load, I guess is how I'd part ways with us. So thanks everybody for being on the webinar, and have a great day.